Hey everybody, David Brewster here with another episode of Chordplay, and this is Famous Big Chords. And you might be thinking, what do you mean by big chords? But historically, in rock music and popular music, and metal, and classical, and jazz, and a bunch of different styles of music, there are these iconic chords, that are strummed or usually hit, on the guitar, rather aggressively. And especially in rock music, we're going to kind of focus on rock. But you can find this in other styles of music too. Flamenco, there's huge, very energetic and aggressive chords in flamenco and classical guitar music. And like I mentioned, funk, and there's a lot of different styles that feature chords like this. But definitely in rock music and rock and roll, like back in the 50s, um, I might create a few arguments with this particular, opinion. But in my mind, the pioneer of rock guitar, like the big chord pioneer, it's probably not who you think. It's not Chuck Berry, it's not Elvis, definitely not Elvis. Sorry, Elvis, but Elvis was important, but I don't really hold him as highly as some people. I think Chuck Berry was actually the king of rock and roll. Sorry, Elvis, but you were important. All right, well, this episode is going to be kind of a grab bag of chords. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I hear an interesting chord or an unusual chord or just a certain texture, like maybe a certain guitar tone mixed with a certain chord, strummed or played a certain way, it triggers something in my head or in my ear, and it's like, aha, there's something there. And so part of the reason why I'm talking about this, and part of the reason why I created this lesson was to expose some of these sounds and chords that you'll hear all over the radio, and you'll hear it classic rock and modern rock and other styles of music too. But it's just kind of playtime. Like we're just kind of playing around with chords. I'm hoping that maybe some of these shapes might open some new ideas, or maybe you're writing a song, or maybe you stumble on one of these shapes and then you start writing a new song. But if you're in the process of writing a song, like maybe one of these shapes might help you come up with a new part, or maybe you might incorporate it in a progression and kind of update, or give your song a facelift. So these are interesting, like when you're feeling creative and being creative and writing music, but they're also just good to practice, and play around with. And then plus the historical side is interesting too, like to trace the history and notice, where these chords are being used, throughout time, and rock music and other styles too. But in my opinion, Link Wray is the important big chord pioneer. And if you're not really sure who Link Wray was, definitely a legendary guitarist. I think he ranked like 40 or something on the Rolling Stones, like greatest guitarist of all time, which I hate those lists, but he did receive a fairly high ranking, for a 50s, guitarist. But Link Wray's Rumble, it was recorded in 1954. It wasn't released until 1958. And that's a very controversial song. And you might be thinking, well, why did they wait 4 years? People were afraid of this song. The song was banned in Boston and banned in New York because they were afraid it was going to start riots. They thought, this song is going to incite riots. We have to ban it. And they tried to stop, the song from being released. They didn't want to play it on the radio. They literally thought people were going to riot in the streets just upon, hearing the song. So you might be thinking, what? And if you've heard Rumble, it's been featured in movies and a bunch of stuff. It's a classic song. But this is the epitome of what I'm talking about. And we're going to look at, some different chords and different, sounds. But Rumble, obviously it sounds like this. That might sound really tame to you. You might be thinking that was going to cause riots. But yes, in the 50s, before rock and roll really hit, um, that song was so, forward thinking and so, advanced that people weren't ready for it, I think I even read somewhere like the producer, like the record producer or, engineer in the studio hated the song. Link Wray was cutting like slits in his speaker cone to make it sound, even nastier and dirtier to get more distortion, basically. He was cutting up his speaker. The Kinks also did that too. But anyway, so that song, Bob Dylan, I think actually, was quoted as saying that's like the best instrumental song ever, or the best rock instrumental, ever recorded or something like that. So that's a legendary tune. But that one song, eventually it became a radio hit. Like by 1958, people were aware of the song, they loved it, and it became a radio hit, even though people were terrified, like the DJs and people that, own the record station, in the, the radio stations, they were totally afraid of the song. Now, arguably one of the most popular or, influential big chords of all time. I'm actually wearing the right shirt. Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. This is a G7 sus4. And there was actually a university, now I can't remember what college it was, but there was a physics professor that did a study on just the opening chord to A Hard Day's Night. And there's been a lot of debates and arguments about it. And the chord itself, it has a very famous sound. And it's really hard to nail that sound. They all piled up, and everybody was kind of stacking and doing something different on that first chord. When you hit play on A Hard Day's Night, that's the first thing you hear is this, just, it's almost like you're using a fly swatter. It's very abrupt and to the point, fast drum, but big chord, it grabs your attention. And there's a lot of examples of this, if you can look through music. And it doesn't have to be rock music, like I said. Let's take another, famous chord, like the James Bond chord, E minor major 9. Just the sound of that chord evokes a certain mood or it makes you feel a certain way. Think of Bond getting captured and, the bad guy, chains him to a wall or something. And you hear this mysterious sound, right? And that E minor major 9, the James Bond chord. Keep in mind, of course, guitarists like Pete Townshend from The Who, massively important, big chord fan. I mean, listen to Pinball Wizard, My Generation, and some of that stuff. And you'll hear those huge windmill chords, and he definitely was kind of a pioneer of, those big power chord sounds. And a lot of them he acquired, an open position. And, one of Pete Townshend's big secrets is eliminating the third. And this is something you can find in other guitarist styles too, Eric Johnson and a bunch of other players. Malcolm Young, from AC/DC, of course, the late, great, Malcolm Young. But with Pete, like if you'd see him doing the windmill, commonly he would either be doing that on a G or an E. But on a G, he would basically mute out, the third, that B note right there. So it might look like he's fretting it, but really, it's just kind of muted. But you don't really hear that, in the chord. And then also, with like an E major chord, instead of letting the third, like that G sharp right there, instead of having that in the chord, he would really just lay his finger on it, And I'm not going to imitate the windmill. I'll probably knock my computer off the desk. But that's kind of one of Pete Townshend's big chord secrets. And of course with Malcolm Young, look at a song like Jailbreak, from AC/DC. There's a giant E, a D, and an A. Right? Really classic riff, and it's got that huge big chord sound. And for a little bit more of a recent example, this is from the 80s, but like Steve Vai, like the opening chord from Yankee Rose, when he played on David Lee Roth's Eat 'Em and Smile album. That C sus4 in the opening, it has a very distinct sound. It catches your attention. You hit play on that album, and that's the first thing you hear is this. That huge kind of ringing sound, real chorusy and slight overdrive. But it's got that really nice voicing and a really interesting flavor too, and it catches your attention right off the bat. And he definitely, Vai, that is definitely a big fan of these chords. So if you listen to a song like Ballerina 1224 on Passion and Warfare, you'll hear like this major 9 being kind of played around with. And this is kind of an unusual chord. You can see the fingering's kind of weird. And it's one of those chords where I always have to kind of remind myself how to play it. It's like, oh yeah, don't do it that way. You know, do it that way. It's a little easier. You can definitely hear him play with that. I think he had like an eventide harmonizer going on that too to give it that real shimmery, upper register sound. But a really interesting chord. And you can see that is a tricky chord. The fingering's really weird. And it's a good one just for, building some strength and some barring, ability. So you've got the 10th fret on the low E string and also the 10th fret on the B string with your 3rd and middle finger. Your index finger's barring the 9th all the way across. And then of course your pinky's reaching up there and grabbing that D there on the 12th fret on the D string. So it's a handful, you're using all of your fret hand fingers. But that's one of the nice benefits from working on these big chords, is they're stretchy usually, they give you some additional, additional workout with your fret hand. And here's another kind of Steve Vai approved chord, but you'll find this in a lot of other songs, not just, from Steve Vai, but E minor 11 played this way. Really cool chord. Move that around, try it in different positions and different keys. Okay, another chord, if you've been watching, these episodes of Chordplay, another chord that's popped up a lot. We've seen it in multiple episodes, with Pink Floyd, and there's tons of episodes that feature this chord so far. But the E minor 9, we've seen that a few times, right here. And that's definitely a very famous, big chord. Metallica, you'll hear a lot of songs, that use this chord. But there's one little alteration we can add, and we can change it to an E minor 9 just by adding the D right here. Well, it's already an E minor 9, but it's a modified E minor 9. Just a slight alteration right there. And then if you're familiar with that chord, there's another really interesting variation, and we can change it to an E minor 11 by adding the pinky here on the 5th fret on the high E and adding that A note. And I really love that chord. That just sends, kind of shivers in my head where it's like, yeah, I like the tonality. It's got this very mysterious, moody sound. Now you can find that chord in the song Ship of Fools by Robert Plant, which is a solo release of his from the 80s. That's a great song. And I always love the guitar parts and the chords in that song, but at the very end of the song, you'll hear him just kind of strum that chord. It gives it this really nice, just kind of moody, mysterious, ending chord. Just kind of leaves you hanging, but I like that. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay. So leave some comments and feedback, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more content, lessons, and material very soon. Thank you.